You think the deadliest part of a 19th century spinning mule was the thousands of razor-sharp spindles? You're wrong. The real killer was the floor. Specifically, a gap of exactly 4 inches, just enough to fit a human skull. In 1832, children weren't just workers. They were irreplaceable components of the machinery. An 8-year-old had exactly 3 seconds to crawl under a moving 1.5-ton carriage, scrape away the dust, and slide out before their ribs became part of the gears. Why did the world's most powerful empire decide that a child's life was worth less than a 5-minute machine stoppage? Today, we're looking at the brutal engineering of the Industrial Revolution, where the perfect part had a pulse, cost 2 shillings a week, and officially didn't even exist. Manchester, the Ancoats District, February 7th, 1832. That morning, McConnell and Kennedy's mill started 126 spinning mules simultaneously. The foreman moved between the rows without raising their eyes. The boiler had been running since 4 in the morning. Threads moved. Carriages moved. It was an ordinary Monday. The spinning mule is not a machine in any conventional sense. It is a living system that breathes. The spindles, thousands of them turning at several hundred revolutions per minute, draw every eye in the room. Visitors to a spinning floor always watch the spindles. That is where the obvious danger appears to live. It doesn't. The spindles sit at shoulder height. The real problem is 18 inches below them at floor level. A carriage weighing close to 1.5 tons travels forward and back along iron rails, cycle after cycle without pause, from first light until the shift bell at dusk. The travel distance is more than a meter in each direction. At the far end of each stroke, the floor beneath the carriage opens, a narrow, dark passage exactly 4 inches high between the lower frame and the boards underfoot. 4 inches is the thickness of a human skull, plus a few millimeters. The sound the machine makes in operation is not a clatter and not a screech. It is a steady, almost soft rumble that travels up through the floorboards, through the soles of boots, through the bones of the shins. In the spinning room, that sound never stops. It becomes background, and background eventually you stop hearing. Job Leakey was 8 years old. He had worked as a scavenger at the mill for 11 months. His task, while the carriage drew back, crawl beneath the machine, pull the lint and thread waste off the rails, and clear the passage before the carriage came forward again. He had approximately 3 seconds per cycle. The motion had been drilled to reflex. Left shoulder down, head turned sideways, arms flat and extended, knees never raised from the floor. The overlooker gave him the same instructions every morning, not from care, because stopping a machine for manual cleaning cost 5 minutes of downtime, and 5 minutes multiplied across 126 machines produced a figure the counting house did not forgive. McConnell and Kennedy's production records for 1832 document 4 minor injuries among children under 10 years of age. Not one is classified as resulting from contact with the carriage. All 4 carry the same entry, worker negligence, in the same archive, in a folder of internal correspondence not intended for external review. There is a letter from junior mechanic Thomas Wirt, dated September to 1831. Wirt wrote to the director that the clearance beneath the carriage on the new pattern machines had decreased by 1/4 inch compared to the older model, the consequence of a modified rail profile. He proposed raising the frame. There is no reply preserved in the archive. There is only a penciled note in the margin, in a different hand, not relevant. Wirt never raised the matter again. In March 1832, he received a promotion to senior mechanic. 3 weeks later, Job Leakey did not get out from under the machine in time. The mill owners did not hide the logic. They published it. Industry reports from the 1820s listed scavengers as an indispensable operational element of the spinning floor. Stopping a mule every 20 minutes for manual lint clearance reduced productivity by 18%. A child between 6 and 10 weighed under 40 pounds, responded to a spoken word, and cost 2 shillings a week. A mechanical cleaning device, had anyone developed one, would have cost the equivalent of 15 scavengers' annual combined wages. The arithmetic appeared in trade publications, in parliamentary submissions, in mill correspondence. It was simply never described as arithmetic about human beings. The visitor to a spinning floor in 1825 would expect the danger to have a face, a brutal overseer, a reckless owner, a man who gave the order. But the scavenger did not appear because anyone issued a directive. He appeared as the natural consequence of a machine's geometry, and no one altered that geometry because no one officially conceded the problem existed. Samuel Crompton patented the spinning mule in 1779. The patent contains no reference to maintenance of the space beneath the carriage. Between 1800 and the 1820s, the machine scaled upward threefold. The carriage approached a ton. The gap beneath it did not disappear. It became lower and darker, and the industry adapted by sending in children rather than redesigning the frame. William Drinkwater, overlooker of the spinning room at a Bolton mill, gave testimony before the Sadler Commission in 1832. He said, "I did not consider it dangerous, provided the child was properly trained." Asked how many children under his supervision had sustained carriage injuries in 3 years, he answered, 2, but in both cases it was their own hastiness. He was not asked how many hours per day those children had worked before the incidents occurred. That answer exists elsewhere in the same records, 14 hours. Former scavengers who survived into adulthood described the same phenomenon independently. After several months of the work, they stopped hearing the carriage as a warning. The sound became a pulse that came from below the floor rather than inside the chest. The danger began not with the noise itself, but with a change in its rhythm. When a stroke regulator wore unevenly, the carriage could return a quarter second early. At 60 centimeters per second, a quarter second was 15 centimeters, exactly the distance between legs clearing the frame and legs not clearing it. The Sadler Commission gathered testimony from 89 individuals. 23 of them described injuries sustained beneath the carriage during childhood. The report was presented to Parliament. Within weeks, the Textile Manufacturers Association retained a medical expert who stated publicly that most injuries described were consistent with the natural physical characteristics of children from impoverished backgrounds and bore no demonstrable connection to factory conditions. The expert's fee does not appear in the association's published accounts. It appears in a separate ledger under professional consultations. One witness was 15-year-old John Hampson of Stockport. He described how he had trained his younger brother in the work of a scavenger. He said, "I told him, if you get frightened and stop halfway, that is worse than if you had never gone in at all, because then you will not make it." The stenographer recorded it without comment. That sentence describes the precise mechanism behind most deaths. Not ignorance of danger, but paralysis at the exact moment the danger had already started moving. Hampson survived. His brother did not. But that was not news in Stockport, because by then the town had already developed its own language for events like that one. In the working districts of Manchester, Bolton, and Stockport in the early 1830s, there existed a specific vocabulary. "He got caught" meant a child had been seized by a drive belt. "She didn't make it" meant the carriage. "He's no longer at the mill" could mean dismissal, escape, death, or disability. And no one pressed for clarification. The word killed passed between workers rarely, not from timidity, but because a direct word pulled a direct question behind it. If someone died because of a machine, who answers for it? And if you asked that question aloud today, would you still have work tomorrow? The mill owners did not create this vocabulary, but they used it with precision. Internal incident records from McConnell and Kennedy covering 1828 to 1833 contain no entry using the word death. There is cessation of employment due to incapacitation, discharge on grounds of unfitness, absence without prior notice. This language had practical value beyond mere discretion. Britain's insurance industry at the time refused claims from families when a worker, or their parent, had signed a labor contract under conditions of known risk. Risk was considered known if a contract existed. The standard contract for a child scavenger ran 11 lines. It contained no description of the space beneath the carriage. Mary Leakey, Job's mother, submitted a compensation claim to the McConnell and Kennedy counting house 1 week after her son's death. The reply came in writing. The boy had acted contrary to the overlooker's instruction, and the company therefore bore no legal liability, but in sympathy offered 3 shillings, a sum roughly equal to half a year of Job's wages. Mary Leakey took the 3 shillings. There was no alternative. Her husband had not returned from a night shift at a coal pit 2 months prior, and she had 4 other children. Children's burials in the Manchester parishes of the 1820s and 1830s are recorded as anomalously brief, not because the families lacked grief, but because parents could not afford to miss a shift. The procession left before 5 in the morning, ahead of the factory gates opening, a plain wooden coffin, 4 adults, a priest who spoke quickly, the remaining children of the family already in the queue at the mill entrance. The smell of morning coal smoke over the churchyard mixed with the machine oil on the clothes of those who had come directly from the night shift. The ground was usually still soft at that hour. No one waited for it to dry. In 1833, following passage of the Factory Act, the government appointed 4 inspectors to oversee all textile enterprises in Britain, 4 men for more than 3,000 mills. One of them, Leonard Horner, reported in 1836 that over 3 years he had physically visited fewer than 7% of the establishments in his district. At the majority of mills he did manage to reach, the owners had received advance notice, a day ahead, sometimes 2. Horner recorded this without comment. In the same report, one figure stands alone: the number of documented violations involving children under 9 years of age across those 3 years, 0. Horner was not a corrupt official. That is well documented. He fought owners repeatedly and pushed for genuine enforcement. But 0 violations did not come from negligence or bribery. It came from something simpler. The Factory Act prohibited employment of children under 9 in textile mills, so owners stopped entering children under 9 into the registers. The children remained on the floor. They continued the work. But officially, they no longer existed, which meant they could not be injured, could not die, and required no entry under any heading that an inspector might read at a counting house desk while the spinning room ran at full capacity 20 yards away. The records were clean. The floor was not. And the machines continued running, with children beneath them who on paper had never been there at all. London, Whitehall, April 1836. Leonard Horner, Senior Inspector of Factories, submitted his annual report to the Home Office, 214 pages, organized by district, cross-referenced by mill category. Documented deaths of children beneath spinning mule carriages, 0. Parliament received the report without remark. The expected response to that figure is outrage at the cover-up, at the bribery, at the man who falsified the numbers. But Horner was one of the most scrupulous civil servants of his generation. He took no payments. He filed every irregularity he witnessed. He argued with owners in person and in writing. He was not the problem. The problem was that the system had been constructed to produce the appearance of oversight while making oversight structurally impossible. The zero in his report was not a lie. It was the architecture of a system that generated clean numbers from a dirty floor, and the two things never needed to meet. The Factory Act of 1833 assigned 4 inspectors to more than 3,000 textile enterprises across Britain. Each inspector's district covered a population larger than several European states. The act required owners to maintain age registers for all workers, but did not require those registers to be verified during active production. Inspections were conducted in the counting house in the presence of the owner or his representative, with the records laid flat on a desk. The spinning room continued running throughout. Children under 9 were absent from the registers. They were not absent from the floor, but the inspection never reached the floor, and so officially, neither did they. James Nuttall, junior engineer at Sharp and Roberts in Manchester, compiled an internal technical memorandum in 1838 on the wear rate of carriage stroke regulators in machines of the 1824 pattern. He documented that when regulator wear exceeded 15%, the carriage stroke accelerated unevenly, reducing the safe window beneath the machine from 3 seconds to under 2. He recommended scheduled maintenance every 18 months. The production director's written resolution survives, noted, current maintenance interval, 36 months, revision inadvisable. Nuttall did not challenge the decision. That same month, he was promoted to senior engineer. Inspected mills had a particular smell on the days Horner visited, not coal and machine oil, whitewash. Owners had the walls freshly limed before his arrival. The lime cut through the cotton dust that had settled into the boards and plaster over years of production. After one visit, Horner wrote in his inspection notes, "Factory maintained in exemplary order." 3 weeks later, in that same room, a carriage came to rest on a child's rib cage during a cycle in which the stroke regulator had slipped beyond the threshold Nuttall had described. In 1836, a parliamentary committee examined a proposal to expand the inspectorate to 20. The Textile Manufacturers Association filed a counter-petition, arguing that an enlarged inspection apparatus would generate bureaucratic pressure incompatible with the competitive position of British industry. The committee rejected the proposal. The inspectorate remained at 4 for the next 11 years. Preserved in the same association archive are the internal calculations that accompanied the petition. They were not prepared for Parliament. They show the average penalty for a Factory Act violation, 20 shillings. The average weekly profit from a single mill maintaining undocumented child labor, 8 to 12 pounds sterling. The risk-to-profit ratio in the document is marked with a single word, acceptable. Horner received a copy of those calculations through an anonymous source in 1837. He forwarded them to the Home Office with a covering letter proposing a restructured penalty system. The ministry replied 4 months later. The reply is preserved in the archive. It reads, "The letter has been noted." The same word that appeared in pencil on Wirt's margin, the same word on the director's resolution above Nuttall's recommendation. Noted is the system's language, not rejected, not approved. The document exists. The person who wrote it discharged their obligation. The filing cabinet closes, and beneath the carriage, in the 4 inches between the lower frame and the floor, silence between 2 beats of the pulse. Bolton, October 14th, 1842. By 8 in the morning, Roughly 200 spinners had failed to appear at 4 mills simultaneously. There were no manifestos, no speakers at the gates. They simply had not come. The overlookers waited until 8. At 9, they sent men to the workers' homes. Nobody was there. The expected cause is wages, or hours, but the immediate trigger was neither. The previous Sunday, a 9-year-old boy named Henry Cole had died during his shift at John Smith's mill. The attending physician recorded the cause as constitutional weakness from birth. The owner refused the family permission to collect the body before the shift ended. Henry Cole lay in the mill storeroom for 6 hours. By midday Sunday, every household in the quarter knew this. The Ancoats district on the morning of October 14th acted without coordination, and precisely because of that, acted in unison. The story of Henry Cole's body had moved through the streets Sunday evening, not through meetings, but through women returning from the market carrying it between sentences, through children passing details between themselves that the adults would not say aloud. By Monday morning, every spinner in Ancoats had arrived at the same decision independently behind their own front door. A police report filed 3 days later described it as silent panic. No one had shouted, no one had organized, but half the district did not walk through the factory gates. Edward Preece, overlooker of the spinning room at Smith's Mill, kept a private diary, a document intended for no other eyes, discovered in a family archive by his grandchildren in 1910. He recorded that he did not sleep the night between Sunday and Monday, not from fear of what morning would bring, because at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon he had personally carried Henry Cole's body to the storeroom, acting on the owner's instruction. He wrote, "I could not have done otherwise and cannot explain to myself why. It is the only sentence in the diary where Preece used the words cannot twice. A spinning room without people is a distinct and separate sound. The machines were not cut at once. First the drive belts were lifted from the drums, and the frames ran on for several minutes under their own inertia, gradually slowing. The rumble dropped to a creak, the creak to a series of dry clicks, the clicks to silence. That silence, by the accounts of those who heard it, was physically tangible, a pressure behind the eardrums, the way a room feels after a detonation has passed through it. The smell remained, overheated oil, cotton lint suspended in still air, the damp of spent steam in the boards. But the pulse that had run through the floor every working day for years was gone. The room felt like a held breath. John Smith hired 30 replacement workers from Leeds the following morning, at double the daily rate. They arrived by train at 6 o'clock. The local workers let them pass in silence. One of them, Thomas Ashworth, a former weaver from Leeds, wrote to his brother that on the first day the overlooker demonstrated how to crawl beneath the carriage. Ashworth asked what the mill paid children for that work. The overlooker told him there were no more children. Adults did it now. 2 pence extra per shift. The strike lasted 9 days. On the 10th, most of the workers returned. The conditions were unchanged. But in Smith's counting house ledgers for October 1842, there is an entry that has no equivalent before or after it: expenditure on technical maintenance of carriage mechanism, a sum equal to approximately 3 weeks of an overlooker's wages. No previous record of such maintenance exists, no subsequent record either. The entry falls precisely within those 9 days when the floor stood empty and the machines had stopped for the first time in years, long enough for someone to get underneath them with a lantern and proper tools, without the carriage moving, without a child in the way, without needing to hurry. Nobody knows exactly what was repaired in those 9 days. But when the workers came back, the carriage ran evenly. Preece wrote one line in his diary: "Today the machines sound different." He did not explain what he meant. Perhaps he could not. Manchester, 1856. In the spinning room of McConnell and Kennedy's mill, the same floor where Job Leakey had not come out from under the carriage in time 24 years earlier, engineers installed the first automatic stop mechanisms on the new pattern spinning mules. The technology had existed since the early 1840s. What delayed its adoption was not the absence of a solution. It was the absence of any legal requirement to implement one. The natural expectation is that the end of children's work beneath the carriage came through Parliament, or through the sustained pressure of reformers, or through the accumulated weight of the Sadler testimonies finally reaching the right desk. It came through none of those things. It came through the machines themselves. By the mid-1850s, the spinning mule had grown to a scale its original patent could not have anticipated. The new carriage was heavier, its clearance lower, its stroke faster. A child of 8 could no longer fit beneath it at all. The gap had closed, not because anyone raised the frame, as Thomas Wirt had proposed a quarter-century before, but because the carriage had descended far enough to make the question moot. The problem was resolved by being made physically impossible. Progress did not protect the children. It simply outgrew them. The generation that had worked as scavengers and survived grew into the overlookers, foremen, and small contractors of the 1860s factory districts. They knew the machines from the inside, literally, in a way no engineer trained at a drawing board ever would. They understood the sound of a regulator wearing unevenly before any gauge showed it. They could read the vibration in the floor the way a sailor reads water. They rarely spoke of this to their children, not from reluctance, but because the language for it had never existed. The workers' vocabulary that replace killed with didn't make it, did not transmit memory. It sealed it. What stayed inside stayed there without exit, the way cotton dust stayed in the lungs, invisible, accumulating, never fully gone. In 1910, Edward Preece's grandson donated the diary to the Bolton local archive. With it came a sealed envelope containing 3 shillings. No note, no explanation of where they had come from. Mary Leakey had died in 1849. Preece himself in 1871. Who placed the coins in the envelope and when, the archive does not record. But the envelope had been sealed carefully, the way you seal something you intend for someone else to open. By 1850, the spinning mills of Manchester and Bolton had produced more than 60% of the cotton thread consumed across the British Empire. That thread ran through colonial trade ledgers, army supply contracts, naval cordage, the domestic linen of the Victorian middle class. None of those goods carried a notation indicating the clearance between frame and floor at which they had been produced. 4 inches appeared in no column of any trade register. It was an internal measurement, internal to the machine, internal to the industry, internal to the districts that had built a working language specifically so it would not have to be said aloud. A spinning mule of the 1825 pattern stands today in the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. It does not run. The carriage is fixed at the midpoint of its stroke, neither forward nor back. The gap between the lower frame and the base is exactly 4 inches. The museum placard describes the machine as a remarkable achievement of the Industrial Revolution and gives Samuel Crompton's name. It gives no other name. The floor beneath the carriage has been sanded smooth and lacquered. It smells of timber and stillness. In 2003, during a restoration survey, museum technicians found something lodged beneath the lower frame of the carriage, in the area where no standard lighting reaches and no adult hand arrives at without effort. A small piece of coarse woolen cloth, folded double, not cotton lint, not packing material. The weave and weight were consistent with fabric, used to wrap around the knees, to keep skin off the iron rails during repeated contact. The restorers could not date it precisely. They logged it in the catalog as fragment of work clothing, probable 19th century, and returned it to where it had been. It is still there. They do not make machines like that anymore. And they do not make the people who knew how to disappear into 4 inches of space between a moving frame and a fixed floor. Those are gone too. But the cloth is still under the carriage, in the dark, where no one sees it and no one removes it. Because to retrieve it, you would have to lie flat on the museum floor and crawl underneath. And that would take approximately 3 seconds.